Breaking news, President Donald Trump has issued a direct demand to the nations of the world, send your warships, help reopen the Strait of Hormuz now. In a statement that signals a significant escalation of the diplomatic and military pressure surrounding the world's most critical oil choke point, Trump made clear that the United States will not carry the burden of keeping the strait open alone, and that every nation on earth whose economy depends on the free flow of oil through that corridor has a responsibility to show up and defend it. The demand is backed by military action already underway. U.S. Central Command has been executing strikes against Iranian vessels and infrastructure attempting to close or threaten the strait. American warships are in position. Anti-mine vessels are deployed. And now Trump is calling on allies and partners across Asia, Europe, and the Gulf to join the effort, not as observers, not as diplomatic supporters, but as active naval participants in keeping the world's energy lifeline open. The stakes of this moment cannot be overstated. 20% of the world's oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. China gets 40% of its oil through that corridor. Japan, South Korea, India, and virtually every major economy in Europe and Asia depend on it. When Iran threatens the strait, it is not threatening America. It is holding the entire global economy hostage. And President Trump has just told the world that ends now, and it ends together. I'm Hannah Blake. This is Global News Diary. Let's get into it. President Trump's demand that other nations help reopen the Strait of Hormuz is not a polite diplomatic request. It is a direct public call to action, and the weight behind it is the full force of American military credibility in the most strategically sensitive waterway on the planet. This statement was made explicitly and without diplomatic softening. Countries that are affected by Iran's attempted closure of the strait, countries whose economies, whose industries, whose citizens depend on the oil that flows through that 21-mile corridor, have a responsibility to act, to send ships, to join the United States in the physical operational defense of a waterway that is as much a global public good as any infrastructure on Earth. This demand represents a fundamental shift in how the United States is framing its role in this conflict. For the early phases of Operation Epic Fury, the American military posture was primarily bilateral. The U.S. and Israel coordinating closely, executing a campaign that the rest of the world watched from the sidelines. Trump's demand changes that framing entirely. The Strait of Hormuz is not an American problem to be solved by American power alone. It is a global problem, and the nations that benefit most directly from its continued openness have a moral and strategic obligation to contribute to its defense. The nations Trump is most directly addressing are the ones that have the most to lose from an Iranian closure of the strait and the most to gain from joining a coalition that keeps it open. Japan, which imports the vast majority of its oil through the strait. South Korea, similarly dependent. India, which has been walking a diplomatic tightrope between its energy relationship with Iran and its broader strategic alignment with the United States. China, which receives 40% of its oil through the corridor and which has been conspicuously absent from any active role in the diplomatic or military response to Iran's aggression. The implicit message to those nations, and particularly to China, is direct. You benefit from this waterway. You depend on it. You cannot stand aside while Iran closes it and expect the United States to bear the entire cost of keeping it open on your behalf. That is a demand, and it comes from a president who has demonstrated through every phase of this conflict that he means exactly what he says. To understand the full force of Trump's demand, it is necessary to understand what the Strait of Hormuz actually is and what closing it would mean for the world. The strait is a narrow passage between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula, 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. Through it flows approximately 20% of all the oil traded on global markets every single day. Saudi crude, Emirati oil, Qatari liquefied natural gas, Iraqi exports, all of it moves through those 21 miles on its way to the refineries and power plants of the world. China receives 40% of its total oil imports through the strait. Japan is overwhelmingly dependent on it. South Korea, India, and virtually every major economy in Europe and Asia rely on it critically. Only a tiny fraction of the oil passing through ever reaches American shores directly. The United States, under President Trump, has become the world's largest oil and gas producer, giving America more insulation from a strait closure than almost any other major economy. Which means that when Trump demands other nations step up, he is demanding that the countries with the most direct exposure to the consequences of a strait closure take responsibility for preventing those consequences. He is telling China, Japan, South Korea, and Europe, this is your problem as much as ours. Your ships, your commitment, your skin in the game. Iran has understood the Strait's significance for decades. Its military doctrine has long identified it as its most powerful asymmetric weapon, the ability to threaten a waterway through which a significant portion of global energy passes without ever needing to win a conventional military engagement. That has been Iran's ace in the hole. Trump's demand is a direct challenge to that strategy, a military challenge backed by the most powerful naval force on earth, and a political challenge demanding the world refuse to be held hostage. Trump's demand did not arrive in a vacuum. It comes backed by the most sustained and comprehensive American military campaign against Iranian naval and military power in the history of the two countries' conflict. U.S. Central Command has already destroyed more than 60 Iranian ships since the beginning of Operation Epic Fury. The entire Iranian surface naval fleet, the warships, the mine-laying vessels, the fast attack boats that represented the primary tools of Iranian maritime aggression has been systematically eliminated. An entire class of Iranian surface combatants has been taken out of the fight permanently. 16 Iranian mine-laying vessels were destroyed in a single operation after Iran began placing sea mines in the Strait. President Trump had warned that any mining of the Strait would trigger military consequences. Unlike anything previously seen, Iran tested that warning. The 16 ships and their crews paid the price. American anti-mine vessels, among the most advanced mine countermeasure ships in the world, are forward deployed in the region. These ships are capable of detecting mines with precision that their commanders describe as equivalent to a bloodhound following a scent. The technology exists. The ships are there. The capability to clear the strait is in place. What Trump is demanding now is the political and military commitment from other nations to augment that capability, to add hulls, to add escort capacity, to add the diplomatic weight that comes from a multinational coalition defending freedom of navigation rather than a unilateral American military operation. The USS Gerald Ford and the USS George H.W. Bush, two of the most powerful aircraft carriers ever built, are already in the region. The USS Tripoli, a light carrier with a Marine Expeditionary Unit aboard, has been en route from Japan. Anti-mine vessels are deployed. Strike aircraft are flying. The American military infrastructure for a sustained strait defense operation is in place. What Trump wants now is partners, and he is not asking politely. Trump's demand is directed at every nation that depends on the free flow of oil through the Strait of Hormuz, but some countries bear a more immediate and direct responsibility to respond than others. Japan is perhaps the most obvious. The Japanese economy is one of the most oil-dependent among developed nations, and the overwhelming majority of that oil comes from the Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz. Japan has a maritime self-defense force with capable surface combatants and a long history of contributing to international maritime security operations. If any nation has both the capability and the direct economic interest to join a strait defense coalition, it is Japan. Tokyo's response to Trump's demand will be closely watched. South Korea faces a similar calculus, a major manufacturing economy with enormous energy needs, heavily dependent on Gulf oil with a capable naval force. South Korea has both the means and the motive to contribute meaningfully to a strait defense effort. India presents a more complex case. New Delhi has been carefully managing its relationships with both the United States and Iran, maintaining oil imports from Iran even under American pressure, while deepening its broader strategic partnership with Washington. Trump's demand forces India to make a more explicit choice about where it stands. Sending warships to help defend the strait would be a significant statement of alignment. Declining to do so would be an equally significant statement. And then there is China. 40% of China's oil imports flow through the Strait of Hormuz. No nation on earth has a greater direct economic stake in the strait remaining open. And yet China has been conspicuously absent from any active role in the diplomatic or military response to Iranian aggression in the region, while simultaneously being accused by American senators of potentially providing intelligence support to Iran. Trump's demand places China in an uncomfortable position. If Beijing sends warships to help defend the strait, it is implicitly joining an American-led coalition against its Iranian partner. If Beijing refuses, if China continues to benefit from a waterway it does nothing to defend, Trump has a powerful political and diplomatic argument that China is freeloading on American military sacrifice while potentially supporting the adversary causing the problem. That is not a comfortable position for Beijing, and Trump knows it. Trump's demand requires understanding the strategy Iran has been executing executing because that strategy is precisely what the demand is designed to defeat. Iran's approach to the Strait has been methodical, unable to win a conventional military engagement against the United States and Israel. The regime has turned to the one asymmetric weapon it possesses that can impose costs on the entire global economy, regardless of the military balance, the threat of closure. Iran cannot sink an American aircraft carrier. It cannot shoot down American stealth bombers. Its military has been degraded to a fraction of its former capability across every conventional domain, but it can plant mines. It can launch drone swarms at commercial vessels. It can use unmanned surface craft to harass tanker traffic. It can create enough uncertainty about the safety of transit through the strait that insurance rates skyrocket, shipping companies divert, and the oil the world depends on stops flowing, not because it has been destroyed, but because the risk of moving it has become too high. That strategy does not require a powerful military to execute. It requires only the willingness to create chaos in a confined space, and the understanding that the economic pain is distributed across the entire global economy, while Iran, already under severe sanctions, has relatively little additional economic exposure. Trump's demand for a multinational naval coalition is the direct counter. A coalition of warships from Japan, South Korea, the United Kingdom, France, and India does not just add escort capacity. It changes the political calculation for Iran entirely. Attacking a tanker escorted by an American destroyer is one thing. Attacking the same tanker escorted by vessels from 5 nations is a fundamentally different proposition, one that transforms a bilateral conflict into a confrontation with the international community. That is what Trump is building, and it is why this demand matters far beyond the immediate military context. The response to Trump's demand from Japan, South Korea, India, the European nations, and most critically China will shape not just the next phase of this conflict, but the broader international order that governs how global commons are defended in the decades ahead. If the world answers, if nations with direct economic stakes in the Strait step up with ships and commitment, the outcome is transformative. The coalition that forms around the Strait of Hormuz becomes a demonstration that the international community can and will defend freedom of navigation against state-sponsored aggression. It removes the burden of strait defense from American shoulders alone and distributes it across a coalition that represents the genuine global interest in open seas and free commerce. And it sends Iran a message that no amount of asymmetric harassment can close a waterway that the world has collectively decided to keep open. Beyond the immediate military effect, it establishes a precedent, a clear, actionable precedent for how nations respond when a regional power attempts to weaponize a global choke point. That precedent matters for the South China Sea. It matters for the Taiwan Strait. It matters for every waterway on Earth where the freedom of navigation that underpins global trade could one day be threatened. If the world does not answer, if the nations that benefit most from the Strait choose to stand aside and let the United States carry the burden alone, the consequences are different and darker. It validates the Iranian strategy of imposing global costs while directing aggression at a single nation. It demonstrates that free rider behavior in international security is tolerated, and it leaves the United States bearing the military, economic, and political costs of a mission that serves the entire global economy. Trump's demand is designed to prevent that outcome. It is a test of the international order, a direct question to every nation that depends on the free flow of Gulf oil. Are you willing to contribute to the defense of the system that makes your prosperity possible? The answer from each nation will say something important, not just about this conflict, but about what kind of world we are building on the other side of it. Here is today's question, and it is one that goes to the heart of global responsibility in this conflict. Trump is demanding that nations like Japan, South Korea, India, and even China contribute warships to help reopen the Strait of Hormuz, arguing that countries whose economies depend on it must help defend it. Do you think the world will answer that call? And what should happen to nations that benefit from the open strait but refuse to help defend it? Drop your answer in the comments below. This community brings the most informed international perspective on this platform. The best responses get featured in our next video. If this breakdown gave you the full strategic picture behind Trump's demand, hit that like button right now. 2 seconds. That is all it takes to help this channel reach people who deserve to understand what is happening. Subscribe if you are not already here. We cover every major development in this war with the depth and context the story demands. Turn on notifications. This situation is moving fast, You do not want to be behind when the next major development breaks. Share this video. Send it to someone who needs to understand what is actually at stake in the Strait of Hormuz. This is the breakdown they need. I'm Hannah Blake. This is Global News Diary. We will be back the moment this story develops further. Stay sharp, stay informed.